Gosh, this is a car vlog. I do not have any phone thing in my car to set my phone in. I took it out a couple weeks ago. I thought I figured out a better way, and it ain't. So just bear with this lighting and angle and setup and the whole shenanigans. There's a word that I wanted to talk about, run my mouth about, go on and on about for just a bit, maybe rant about, I don't know. But the word is a word that has become very popular lately, and some of us who are a certain age have seen these ebbs and flows in language. We've seen words become popular and begin to replace other words. And as I've become older, I've noticed that we've taken words that are very direct and blunt and to the point. And there is a generation that comes behind and replaces it with a word that's much more easy to digest. But in my mind, I still hold on to the original word. And I want to talk about one of those sets of words. I want to talk about the two words. The first one I want to talk about is the word toxic. It's become a diagnosis for a person's psychosis. It has become a descriptor. It has become a way to classify and identify individuals, relationships, groups. Originally when I was taught the word toxic, I was taught about, like trash or waste or something that if ingested by you, or even if you could be exposed to it, it could cause fatal harm, like literally kill you. So we were raised up to see these signs where you saw a circle and then you saw a skull and bones in the middle. And when you saw that on something, you knew that it was toxic. And you knew that by getting close to this particular thing, you were exposing yourself to the risk of fatal harm. So let's talk about that word toxic again and how it's being used today. You hear people describe other people or themselves as toxic. And that's usually a word that is used when a person has certain behaviors that demonstrate a lack of humanity, the inability to connect with people on an intimate level, and spread love throughout the world, basically. This person, instead of being a person that is going to bring great things to the people around them, they actually bring bad things, usually emotional sickness and mental illness. I recently used the word toxic. I was in a relationship and I used the word toxic to describe the person that I was in a relationship with, but there was another word that came up because this person was demonstrating behaviors that were mentally and emotionally toxic, and they were very, very typical of a certain type of behavior or a certain kind of mental disorder. And so when I looked up these particular behaviors to try to communicate with this person why I could no longer be in this relationship with them, there was one word that consistently arose, because the word toxic wasn't in this document that I was using to discuss these issues with this person. Instead of the word toxic, this document chose to use the word abuse and abusive. The words abuse and abusive seem to identify these behaviors so much more to me And I'm not going to go into the behaviors because anything that you feel is abusive, truth be told. It's really
in a quarter mile, turn right.
Thank you. And even as I say these things, when I say the word toxic, I literally feel no emotion, so to speak. I don't feel anything triggered in me when I say the word toxic. Maybe
turn right, then turn right.
Maybe because it's a slang word that actually means abusive. And the word abusive does trigger me. I think of experiences that I had as a child or as an adult, and I feel a certain type of way. And
turn right,
and there is
then your destination will be on the left.
So, what I'm noticing is this word
your destination is on the left.
Is easier. It's more palatable. It's easier to digest. It's easier to deal with. But when you talk about behaviors and you talk about a person and their mentality and their personality and how they show up in the world, and you call them abusive or an abuser, they get offended. They get offended. Like, how can you get offended because I called you an abuser? But if I call you toxic, it's acceptable. If I say that your behavior, and I'm going back to the months ago when we had these conversations, if I say your behavior is toxic, you can hear that. You can take it. You can say it back. Because anything that's toxic is toxic in and of itself. You have to actually come into it to be affected by it. A toxic barrel of toxic waste doesn't harm anyone long as it's in that barrel. And it's not very likely that toxic barrel is going to leap out of itself and affect anyone on its own. It'd have to be pulled over, poured over, or something. The container would have to be cut open, but there'd have to be some action for a person or a being to come into contact with that toxic substance. But when one is an abuser, when one is abusive, there is nothing but self-responsibility, because that person behaves and moves that way with people unprovoked. If people love them, if people hate them, if people trust them, if people don't, if people want them or reject them, they move the same exact way. So can we really call them toxic, or should we call them abusive? Because they're not standalone. There's no action that has to provoke who they are. There's no voluntary response that has to happen. You can encounter an abusive person just going about your day. That person is not toxic. That person is abusive. People who get in relationships with people and don't treat them well and then refuse to accept the results of their behavior with other people, or fix it, acknowledge it, deal with it, take responsibility for themselves, and continue to operate and behave in those ways from relationship to relationship to relationship over the course of their lives, are abusive people. They are people that encounter people and abuse them. I remember there was a man who I used to go to a church he was a pastor of. His name is Terrell Murphy. And that man said something I never ever forgot, and I actually had to say these words back to my parents. He said, anything you use outside of its original design, you're abusing it. Anything you don't use the way it was designed to be used, and you don't respect it the way that it's been presented to you, you are abusing it. Now, when I was taught this, it was way before toxic was a thing. This was back in the early 2000s. So there was no toxic and making people feel better when you tell them about who they are. It was a real big on, we had about 10 years where we called a thing, and then it went away. Oh, but I think it's important, I think it's important that we bring that word back, abuse and abusive. There are words that YouTube won't allow you to put in the title of a video. There are words that Instagram and Facebook and other social network platforms won't allow your post to post if it has that word in it. You can use the word toxic, but you can't use the word abusive, abuser, abuse. And I think that's kind of strange. And I promise I'm not high. I'm just flowing. I'm just telling you what's on my mind, because I'm looking, I'm dealing with this behavior. Still. There's a person in my life who was identified as an abuser. And I'm watching this person continue to abuse and attempt to continue to abuse me to this day, even though I've separated myself from this person. And I can't look at them and say they're toxic, because they're being the way they are, and I'm not even interacting with them. I'm not coming into their space in order to experience their toxicity. They are abusive. They are coming outside of themselves to be abusive to others. And there's a difference. And we have to identify that difference and deal with it accordingly. And that's all I got. Ain't got no more. Peace, y'all.